Cancer is actually a parasite, believe it or not, and the cure cost $5. A drug designed to kill parasitic worms just helped 3 stage 4 cancer patients into complete remission. And absolutely no major cancer center will run a clinical trial on it. How does a drug that kills parasites also kill cancer? At the molecular level, cancer really is a parasite. It consumes your resources, it spreads into new territory, and cancer runs the exact same survival machinery that parasites and fungi have been using for billions of years. In 2025, over 2 million Americans were diagnosed with cancer. Cancer in young people is up 79% in 30 years. Colorectal cancer went from the 4th leading cause of cancer death in young men in the 90s to number 1. And I just want to mention something about survival rates too. If anyone ever tells you that they're improving, realize that survival success in cancer means this. If you survive for 5 years, it's a success, okay? And so if you die past the 5 years, you're still considered successful. So first, let me give you a little foundation of what cancer is. The first thing you need to know is in your cells, you have these things called mitochondria. Those are the energy factories in the body. And from every unit of glucose, you make 36 units of energy. They call that ATP. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of how it morphed in our bodies and became part of us, but we made an arrangement that the mitochondria makes the energy and we provide the home for this bacteria. When it's exposed to toxins or radiation and it becomes damaged, now it's going to actually take a different pathway to make energy, okay? Because in the body, it's all about energy. When it reverts into this other system of making energy, this is an ancient system, okay? And it's not very efficient. It's a backup system outside the mitochondria. This system exists in bacteria, it exists in funguses, it exists in all different types of life forms. And this system of energy is very crude and it doesn't make a lot of energy. It's very inefficient. And when I say inefficient, the mitochondria make 36 units of energy per glucose. This only makes 2 units of energy per glucose. And this is what cancer is, okay? A Nobel Prize winner named Otto Warburg discovered this nearly 100 years ago. And this is why when they diagnose cancer, they use a PET scan. What is a PET scan? Well, they inject you with radioactive sugar and then scan the body with this machine. And then the cancer will light up very bright on these scans. And so when you do a PET scan, they can see areas in the body where there's a lot of metabolism of sugar. Okay, that's where you have cancer because cancer is eating that up. So cancer is using this old backup system. It's a primitive survival mode called glycolysis. One of the problems for our cells is there's a lot of waste from this crude machinery and it's producing a lot of lactic acid. And cancer can thrive in that environment where our cells have a hard time. If there's damage in your lung from smoking, for example, and there's inflammation, cancer might travel into that area. Now, I will say that cancer also has some backup plans too, because it's very, very adaptive. It can also live on an amino acid called glutamine. It also can live on branched chain amino acids. And in advanced cases, it can even live on ketones. That's for a different video. And I know this sounds depressing because like, what are we going to do? Just hang in there. I'm getting there. So now what does cancer have to do with parasites? Well, if you think about it, the backup system, glycolysis, okay, is one of the oldest metabolic pathways on planet Earth. Researchers have identified 3 different survival systems that parasites, fungus, worms, and cancer all use to survive. The first one is an internal scaffolding. The scaffolding is an internal skeleton that makes up the structure. And what's very unique about cancer and parasites is they both are rapid dividers. Like even a tapeworm, for example, can produce 50,000 eggs a day. Cancer cells divide nonstop because they basically don't have any more breaks. It's all accelerator. And so if we take an anti-parasitic drug, fenbendazole, this is a drug that grabs onto these little tubular proteins and breaks the scaffolding down. And all of these other anti-parasitic drugs, whether it's ivermectin, natural herbs like wormwood, black walnut hull, and clove, do the same thing either directly or indirectly. The second survival mechanism is they turn off this self-destructive button. Normally, when there's damage within a cell, it actually commits suicide for the greatest good of your body. These parasites, these fungus and cancer cells, have this little sign on them that says, "Don't kill me," okay? And this somehow tricks the immune system into thinking that it shouldn't kill them. The anti-parasitic drugs and natural remedies actually just remove this little badge, so that way your immune system can take over and kill them. So a lot of people ask me, what supplements do I recommend? Now, of course, I'm not biased of my own high-quality supplement line, but if you go to Amazon and type Dr. Berg supplements, you'll find more information. Now, let's talk about the third mechanism of survival, okay? All the parasites, the fungus, all use glycolysis. Well, these anti-parasitic remedies basically start blocking either directly or indirectly glycolysis. So all of these anti-parasitics inhibit the fuel source for cancer. When I was looking into the ivermectin and fenbendazole, I didn't even realize that the other herbal natural remedies that a lot of people take for parasite cleanses also do a very similar action, indirectly and directly. The question is, why haven't you heard about this? Well, first of all, the patents expired years ago, and no one's going to spend $100 million on a $12 remedy. Most of the research, which I'm going to put links down below, are from universities in South Korea, India, and small labs. No industry funding, no conflicts of interest. There's also quite a bit of published case studies documenting these antifungal results in stage 4 patients with cancer that have resistance to chemotherapy. Another interesting study in 2025, fenbendazole targets regular cancer cells and cancer stem cells. These are the seeds that survive chemo and regrow tumors. 100% survival in treated mice, 0 in untreated controls. These compounds even work in chemo-resistant cancers. So yes, you need to cut out the sugar and the refined carbs and the refined grains and the refined starches, because all of that will feed cancer. And I know some people are going to have questions. If I have cancer, do I have to also avoid glutamine and branched chain amino acids and ketones? That information is in another video I'm going to put down below, because what you want to do if you have cancer, and I'm not telling you to try these remedies or not try them. I'm just giving you information to do further research. But if you have cancer, you need to do multiple things, because cancer is very smart. And there's a video I did that talks about how to rotate the diet. So as soon as the cancer starts adapting to one fuel source, you change it to another diet and you keep rotating it. But the other thing you have to realize is that the immune system really is the most powerful thing to kill cancer. And there's 2 cells, one called the killer T cell, and number 2 is the natural killer cell. Both of these immune cells directly kill cancer. And there's 4 things you can do to support these 2 cells, okay? Number 1, you can start to increase your vitamin D levels, but you don't want to just take a little bit of vitamin D, like 600 IUs. That's not enough for the immune system, especially for these 2 guys right here. Fasting, regular fasting and prolonged fasting is probably the most powerful weapon. I've done a lot of videos on that, and I talk about why. Sleep also helps to support these 2 cells, and exercise. So given that information, the antiparasitics, both medication and even some of the natural remedies, have the ability to dismantle the survival mechanism of not just parasites and worms, which are basically the same thing, but also cancer. Why? Because cancer behaves like a parasite. Now, the absolute next most important video for you to watch is what to eat when you have cancer, okay? And how to rotate your eating plan. And for that information, it's right here, this video. Check it out. Your labs are normal. That is probably the most dangerous phrase in modern medicine. Do you know why? Do you actually know what normal means? It doesn't mean you are disease-free. You are just average. And in a population where the majority of people are metabolically sick, average means you're probably in that bucket too. I've seen this in practice for a long time. These people coming in, they do not look healthy. A lot of weight issues, they're losing hair, they have skin issues, but they come in with their blood values that are normal. Some people are told, oh, you know, it's all in your head. Don't buy that. I mean, the worst thing you could do to someone is give them the wrong diagnosis, and that's definitely a wrong diagnosis. Today, I'm going to show you some really important lab values, and then I'm going to talk about some of the most important things you should know about a blood test and what you should focus on. But what happens with the blood values is just picture like a bell curve. And what they do when they create these reference normal ranges is they basically cut out the low end of this graph and the higher end. So as the population is getting sicker and fatter, these normal ranges are really coming out of that group. In 1997, they changed the normal fasting glucose level. It was 140, and then overnight, they changed it to 126 milligrams per deciliter. So before 1997, you would have to reach a blood sugar level of 140 before you were diagnosed with diabetes. And then, of course, right at this point, if you just had 126, you're a diabetic. Overnight, 1.4 million people were diagnosed with diabetes. What's really interesting is that if you look at these trends or graphs of when people had a problem, you will see a lot of diabetic problems that happen over this. And if you don't know this data right here, you're thinking, wow, people are just eating a lot more sugar. Well, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe it's just that they changed the numbers. Also in 2003, pre-diabetic used to be 110. Then after this date, it went to 100. Overnight, 41 million people were diagnosed with pre-diabetes after that. Again, when you're looking at trends and past statistics, you have to have all the data. And this is definitely missing data for a lot of people. And they also did it with cholesterol too, which I think it was in the early 80s. Overnight, millions of people had high cholesterol. And then also with vitamin D. This was done just to look at the amount of vitamin D that you would need to prevent rickets and keep your levels at least at 20 nanograms per milliliter. When they calculated the RDAs, they made an error, which they never corrected. Even now, they have never corrected this error. Because when they did this evaluation and said it was 600, in reality, the true numbers that you need every day to keep your levels at 20 and prevent rickets is 8,895 international units. That's a big difference, right? I know some doctors will even say this amount is toxic. Unbelievable. If you have a vitamin D level of 20 nanograms per milliliter, that is a severe deficiency. That's just my viewpoint. I have a lot of data to back that up. But if you have 20 or less, you are probably suffering from a lot of symptoms that are related to a vitamin D deficiency. One of the biggest problems I see with what doctors test in your blood is glucose, right? They do a fasting glucose test to determine what's happening with your blood sugar. They almost never test insulin. This right here is the biggest blind spot in medicine, okay? You can have perfect blood glucose levels, but have such a major problem with insulin, which is actually made by your pancreas. And literally your pancreas is screaming at you, but glucose is normal. So the most missing test, or the test that is the most important that doctors should be doing, is a fasting insulin test. This hormone right here will be elevated 15 to 20 years before your glucose starts to be elevated. So this test measures how much your pancreas is yelling at you, because insulin is removing sugar from the blood. Okay, normally you should only have like 1 teaspoon of sugar in all of your blood. And so you can imagine an average person consumes a lot of sugar. I'm talking about 50 to 100 teaspoons of sugar per day. So it's like working really hard. And you check your blood glucose, and the reason it's normal is because this guy is in the background working like crazy. What is the normal level of fasting insulin? There is no agreed upon number. Okay, so I'm just going to give you my 2 cents on this based on a lot of research that I've done on this. You want your fasting level of insulin to be between 2 and 6. If it's at 8, you should be concerned. If it's between 10 and 12, you're at high risk for developing insulin resistance and pre-diabetes and then diabetes. But some doctors, when they see like 12, they're saying, well, that's normal. It's not. And then this leads us to the next test right here, HOMA-IR. I'm going to try to keep this really simple. HOMA-IR is doing some calculations between a fasting insulin test and also a fasting glucose test. And it gives you a little more information to tell you if you have insulin resistance. This is a precursor to diabetes. HOMA-IR is basically telling you how glucose and insulin are working together. Because if you really look at what's happening, right? You eat a lot of carbohydrates, you fill up your blood with glucose, and then what happens, insulin comes in there, pulls it out, and the pancreas has to really work hard at doing this. And then the next day, you do the same thing over and over and over. Over a period of time, your body is going to compensate by creating what's called insulin resistance, because too much insulin is very, very toxic. And when that happens, now the pancreas gets a signal like, oh, there's not enough insulin when there really is. So it starts making more and more and more to the point where it starts burning out. And then now it can't regulate glucose. And so now you get prediabetes and then diabetes, which is literally 15 to 20 years after this whole thing started. But if you would have tested fasting insulin, or even this right here, you would pick it up. But doctors never focus on that. So a lot of people ask me, what supplements do I recommend? Now, of course, I'm not biased of my own high quality supplement line, but if you go to Amazon and type Dr. Berg supplements, you'll find more information. I want to just tie in A1C. This is like a dashboard cam. So a dashboard cam is a video camera that you could play back information that happened in the past. A1C is an average of 3 months of blood sugar. So it's kind of taking out all the spikes and giving you an average. So let's say you eat really healthy between Monday and Friday, but on the weekends you go off and you start eating a bunch of carbohydrates. You can check your blood sugar during the week when it's great, but if you take the average from the weekends, it's going to drop it down. So basically an A1C is how much the red blood cell is exposed to glucose. So this really gives you like the 10,000 foot view of what's happening. Now, since we're on the topic of blood sugar, I want to just mention this dawn phenomenon situation right here. What is that? Some people that when they get up in the morning, their blood sugar is high, okay? But they didn't necessarily eat sugar right before that. It's high because either the cortisol is too high in the morning and cortisol mobilizes sugar, or the liver itself is making sugar from other things because the person has insulin resistance. Because the insulin resistance really messes up your liver to the point where it can't really sense things correctly. So then it starts making sugar out of things that are not even sugar or things that you ate that were sugar. So here you are, you're not even eating any carbohydrates, yet your liver is making all this carbohydrate, this sugar, and it's showing up in the morning. So even if you take a diabetic who has severe insulin resistance, 80% of their blood sugar is coming from their liver making a lot of glucose. And that may influence A1C. And so it's a good idea sometimes to measure your blood sugar in the morning. I think what I would recommend if you have this is you want to get rid of the thing that created it in the first place, which is eating too many carbohydrates. If you start going on a low carb diet and you start reducing the need for this insulin, you are going to eventually correct this in relatively short period of time, several months. So it's the combination of intermittent fasting and going low carb will ultimately correct this, a problem with this, lower this, and also correct this right here. You just want to stick with it, keep doing it until eventually you wake up in the morning, you check your blood sugar, and it's normal. A couple other things you could do. You can go for a long walk in the morning to walk off and burn off that sugar. Now, another thing that I know doctors really don't focus on nutrition, but if you were to do a blood test for your minerals, especially potassium or magnesium, or even selenium or zinc, which are also important trace minerals, chances are they're going to show normal in the blood because these minerals are usually not hanging out in the blood. They're deep in the tissues. And so when you're checking the blood, you're only checking a very tiny percentage of where that mineral is, maybe like 1 to 2%, maybe a little bit more with this. And so you're searching for deficiency of something in the wrong place. There are very specialized tests to pick up potassium, magnesium, selenium, and zinc. Instead of going through them in this video, I'm going to put them down in the description so you can get that data if you wanted to test minerals. But typical blood tests don't give you accurate information of what's going on with the minerals. Like even magnesium, for example, which is super important. If you check the blood and it's normal, you could actually be deficient because in your cells where the majority of magnesium is, it could be lowered, but allow a little bit of it to trickle in the blood, giving you the sense that you're normal, but you're really not. Let's talk about number 5, B12. When you check B12 in the blood, you're not just checking the active form of B12, but you're also checking part of the inactive B12. There's another test called MMA test that will pick this up better. And another good one to test this out indirectly would be to check a homocysteine. I will include that down below as well. Number 6, CRP, C-reactive protein. This is an inflammatory marker, and so many people are inflamed. You want this number to be as close to 0 as possible. You want it to be below 1. I've talked to many doctors that will say, well, you know, if you're below 3, you're fine. I disagree because that is an inflammatory process that's going on. And even though the average person has inflammation, that doesn't make it normal. Because again, the normal is basically average, and I don't want to be average. I want to be healthy. If your CRP is between like 1.5 or 2, like let's just say an average of 1.8, that's not good, okay? You don't want that. That is a low-grade inflammatory state, and a couple things you can do to improve this. Through diet, of course, avoid seed oils, avoid sugar, refined carbohydrates, junk food, focus on getting rid of your visceral fat, make sure you sleep better. These are all things that will greatly improve this, in addition to omega-3 fats, which is a natural anti-inflammatory. I like cod liver oil. And then now let's get to number 7, cholesterol. I'm going to do a separate video on this, but cholesterol is something your body makes. It doesn't just equate to a disease. And just because you have high cholesterol does not mean it's a problem, especially if you are on a low-carb diet, because people that are on a low-carb diet, they eat more fat, they're mobilizing more fat, you're going to actually see more cholesterol in the body. And so one really important element of that is to look at the carrier of cholesterol, because cholesterol is not just floating in your blood, it's in a little container that is delivered to the cells and then from the cells back to the liver. And LDL is the number one most confused part of this cholesterol story, because there's actually 2 different types of LDL. And by the way, most people think LDL is bad cholesterol, but it's not. It's something your body makes to deliver cholesterol into the tissues. And so this is why it's really important to do a specialized lipid profile test instead of just a general cholesterol test, because you want to be able to pick up the 2 different types of LDL, pattern A and pattern B. Pattern A is the large buoyant LDL. This is the one that is usually associated with people on a low-carb diet. This is usually the one that's non-pathogenic, because the size of these particles are big and they're floating and they're not invading the arteries, creating inflammation. On the other hand, the pattern B LDL is a small dense particle size which can invade the arteries and is associated with more inflammation and more problem with heart disease, and it's more pathogenic. So you want to do this specialized test to pick up what you have more of. Is it this or that? The way that you get more of this is you go low carb. The way that you get more of this is you eat more carbohydrates. Number 8 is cortisol. The problem with testing your cortisol is on a wave. And if you just check your blood tests with cortisol at one time of the day, you're not going to pick up the whole picture. A better test would be a saliva cortisol where you're checking in the morning, noon, evening, and the middle of the night, so you can get a full picture of what's going on. But of course, it's a pain in the butt because you have to get up in the middle of the night. So there are other tests that you can do to pick up cortisol indirectly. And one of the best tests is a heart rate variability test. Some people have the watches, some people have the bands around the waist, some people even have the rings. HRV technology has come a long way. That measures the autonomic nervous system through the heartbeat. And then lastly, I want to talk about vitamin D. When you test your vitamin D, you're testing the inactive vitamin D in your blood. You're not measuring what's going on in the active form inside your cells. Here's what a lot of even doctors don't know. A very high percentage of the population has what's called vitamin D resistance. Their blood levels look normal, but they're actually very deficient. There's a couple other things you can test with vitamin D to kind of indirectly know if vitamin D is penetrating the cells or not. And the test that you want to do is called a parathyroid hormone test. So if you check your vitamin D levels and if it's normal, and then your parathyroid is high, you can kind of indirectly deduce that I'm probably not getting enough vitamin D, so this parathyroid hormone is compensating. So you really want your parathyroid hormone to be normal. And that way, you know your vitamin D is kind of connecting into the tissues. And this 20 nanograms per milliliter for vitamin D is ridiculously too low. I would recommend at least 50 to 70, but if you're trying to therapeutically fix something, you want it even higher than that. I've done 284 videos on this topic. Now that you know this basic information, I highly recommend you watch my video on this LDL to get all the details to really fully understand this, because this is where so many people are confused because there's all these big words. So I created a video to make it very, very simple right here. Check it out. The number one thing that's destroying your liver is actually not alcohol. And yes, alcohol-related liver disease affects 16 million Americans every single year. And that's a big number. But what if I were to tell you something else? Something that people think is harmless that's currently causing chronic liver disease in 100 million people. Today, we're going to show you what that is. In fact, if you can guess what that is, please comment down below. And then I want to also cover the number one cause of acute liver failure, which is Tylenol. I'm going to get into that as well. But mainly, I'm going to focus on this one right here, which is a huge problem, and a lot of people are not aware of it. So let's first give you a little background on your liver. Your liver has over 500 functions. It's not a place where you store toxins. It takes a toxin or a poison and it turns it into something harmless through a whole series of actions. One of the most powerful compounds in the liver is called glutathione. Glutathione is your protection, your bodyguard. You also have another system of fat export. So this whole system keeps the fat out of the liver, but everything you eat, everything you breathe, everything you put on your skin eventually ends up in your blood and your liver. I mean, even the lotion that you put on your hand, you know, in about a few minutes, it's like gone. Where do you think it goes? It gets absorbed, it's right in your bloodstream, ends up in the liver. So glutathione is one of the key things that helps neutralize some of these poisons. But the key is having enough glutathione. I'm going to show you how to actually increase it if you're deficient. The fat export system is a very interesting system that will shuttle out this fat out of your liver and into the intestines. I'm also going to show you how to enhance that system as well, because having a fatty liver is not a good thing. So what is it that's causing chronic liver disease in 100 million Americans? Fructose. Now, before you say, well, that's just fruit sugar, it can't be that bad. Let me give you a little history. 2,000 years ago, the ancient Romans figured out how to make what's called foie gras, a very expensive delicacy of a diseased fatty liver. And how did they make it? Well, they force-fed geese dried dates. The way they do it now is they force feed with corn and things like that. But back 2,000 years ago, they used dates, which happens to be the richest natural source of fructose. So they use fructose to manufacture fatty liver disease on purpose. And that's exactly what we're doing with our livers right now. But not with dates. With high fructose corn syrup in soda, it's actually in cereals, it's in granola bars, it's in yogurt, it's in ketchup, it's in bread, it's in thousands of processed foods. The fastest way to make a fatty liver. So let's talk about fructose and what's so unique about it and why it's different than glucose. Unlike glucose, which by the way, all of your cells can process, fructose can only be metabolized by your liver. And when fructose hits the liver, it does two devastating things at the exact same time. Number one, it activates fat accumulation. It's a fancy way of saying fructose is basically a fat-making machine in your liver. And number two, it will block the fat burning, okay? In other words, it turns off any ability to get rid of that fat. So you're making all this fat, but you can't get rid of the fat at the same time. That's how the liver becomes fatty. And the research on fructose shows that it is as dangerous as alcohol to your liver. But the difference is when someone hands you a Coca-Cola or a soda with high fructose corn syrup, you're not in your mind comparing what that's going to be doing to your liver. That's going to be very similar to alcohol. But biochemically, the body doesn't know the difference. And I know some people are going to say, well, fructose is in fruit and fruit is natural. That doesn't cause a fatty liver. Well, I'm talking about liquid candy. I'm not talking about the fructose in fruit that has the fiber that breaks down very, very slowly. I'm talking about high fructose corn syrup in such large amounts that it overwhelms the liver. Now, what's really bad is 5 to 10% of children now have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And in obese children, 50% of them have a fatty liver. We're seeing children nowadays as young as 2 years old with fatty liver disease. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is now the most common cause of liver transplants in younger adults under 50 years old. It surpassed hepatitis C. These are not alcoholics. They're young people who are consuming too much fructose. So a lot of people ask me, what supplements do I recommend? Now, of course, I'm not biased of my own high-quality supplement line, but if you go to Amazon and type Dr. Berg supplements, you'll find more information. Now, I want to talk about acetaminophen, Tylenol. There's something you need to know about this. Fructose is a slow, silent chronic killer, but Tylenol is a very fast one. Tylenol is the #1 cause of acute liver failure in the US. Fructose is the most common cause of chronic liver disease. So this is slow, this is fast, because you can end up in the ICU in literally 72 hours. Now, of course, in small doses, it's not that damaging, but it's very easy to actually consume a lot of this. But before I get into that, let me just explain what this does to your liver. It depletes glutathione. Now you cannot neutralize toxins. And Tylenol is hiding in literally 600 different medications. So let's say, for example, someone has a bad cold, and so they take 2 extra strength Tylenol for a headache. So that's 1,000 milligrams right there, okay? Then before bed, they take NyQuil, which also contains acetaminophen. And then they do this every 6 hours. By morning, you've already exceeded the safe limit. And you probably had no idea that you doubled the dose from the same drug. Or your doctor might prescribe Vicodin or Percocet for back pain. And a lot of people don't realize that both of them already contain acetaminophen. And then annoyingly, you take Tylenol on top of that because the pain is so bad. Nearly half of all serious acetaminophen overdoses come from prescription combinations. And here's the worst part. Acetaminophen has a ceiling for pain, okay? So in other words, taking more doesn't reduce your pain anymore, but your liver damage goes through the roof. The early sign of liver damage is nausea, fatigue, vomiting, which also, by the way, looks like the flu. So people might not know that, and then they take more Tylenol when they're actually trying to get rid of the symptoms from too much Tylenol. 500 people die every year from a Tylenol overdose, but 56,000 people end up in the emergency room. What's the good news? The good news is the liver is one of the only organs that has this amazing ability to regenerate, and it can heal. It can bounce back. The first thing you need to do is stop consuming high fructose corn syrup. Stop consuming sugar in general, because even half of sugar is fructose. If you have children, only give them the fructose in fruit, the whole fruit, not the juice. Fruit juice is liquid candy, okay, with a lot of fructose, even if it doesn't have high fructose corn syrup in it. Choline is a really good remedy. And by the way, guess what has the most choline other than liver, which a lot of people don't like? Egg yolks have choline. Choline greatly helps the liver in transporting fat out of the liver. It prevents a fatty liver, and you can reverse a fatty liver by taking choline. The other remedy is something called NAC. This is something that emergency room doctors will use if people have overdosed with Tylenol. Why? What does it do? It increases glutathione. It puts back that bodyguard that was depleted. In fact, if I were you, if I had to take Tylenol for anything, I would get some NAC and I would take it at the same time. That way you can protect your liver. So NAC is not glutathione, but it actually gives the raw material for the liver to make glutathione. Another way that you can get glutathione is by consuming cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, Brussels sprouts. Also, the trace mineral selenium can also help make glutathione as well. Now that you know what destroys the liver, the next most important video is to learn what to eat for the liver, okay, to support a healthy liver. And for that information, check out this video right here. I don't eat sugar. Why is my blood sugar so high? You're doing everything right. You're giving up sugar. You skipped the bread. You haven't had a dessert in quite some time. Yet you look at your blood test and it's like, what's going on? My blood sugar is high. Your doctor might even look at you like you're cheating when you're really not. Let me show you what's going on. There's one piece of this puzzle that a lot of people don't even know about. Most people think that their blood sugar is a result of what they eat, right? Sugar, starches, etc. Yet that's only half the story. I want to introduce you to your liver. Your liver has 500 functions. It is a filter to help you detoxify, but your liver is actually a sugar factory. And so there's a certain small percentage of your body that has to have sugar, okay? So even if you don't eat sugar, these tissues, one is part of the brain and part of the kidney, and there's other tissues that literally depend on sugar. And so if you don't eat sugar, your liver is going to make it. And when a person goes on a low sugar diet or a low carb diet, they're going to get their fuel from the fat from the calories they eat, as well as the fat from their own body. And it makes sugar out of things that are not sugar, okay? It'll make sugar out of fat. It'll make sugar out of protein, and it feeds the different parts of the tissues. The question is, why is my blood sugar higher than it should be? Actually, you have an off switch for this sugar, okay? And the off switch is basically insulin. If there's not enough insulin, your liver is going to be a sugar factory. Now, wait a second, that's kind of conflicting information, because if I'm not eating carbohydrates, I'm not going to stimulate insulin. Insulin's going to go low, so then my body is just going to make a lot of sugar. What normally happens is this hormone has been abused. It's been overstimulated for many, many years, like 10 to 15 years, constantly raised. And then the cells, because they're constantly bombarded with so much insulin, start to ignore this off switch to the point where you develop insulin resistance. That causes the liver to think that, oh my gosh, I need to make more sugar because there's no off switch. And because that's really important, I just want to explain it one more time. The liver is going to make excessive sugar if you have too much insulin resistance. And you develop insulin resistance by consuming a lot of carbohydrates for a long period of time, 10 to 20 years. And let me just give you another layer of this problem, because you go to the doctor, they test your blood sugar, it's normal. Yet you're eating a lot of sugar. How can that be? Well, insulin is coming in there, cleaning it up, and getting it out of the blood. And that happens for a period of time. You can eat a lot of sugar for 10 to 20 years and not have diabetes, but you're going to have high levels of insulin, but doctors never test that until one day you develop so much insulin resistance that insulin now doesn't work, and you're actually deficient in insulin. And so now there's not enough insulin to turn this thing off, and there's not enough insulin to clear out all the sugar from the blood. So now the glucose starts going higher. What's interesting in a diabetic is 80% of the sugar in their blood is coming from this guy right here. This is why certain medications like metformin, for example, they address insulin resistance in the liver and they help the blood sugar, but they have a major side effect because that medication doesn't fix the cause, it just manages the symptom. But the point is, if you're not consuming a lot of sugar, okay, and your glucose is high, it's either coming from the liver, okay, because you have insulin resistance. Don't worry, I'm going to show you how to fix it because it's actually pretty easy to fix. Or you have too much stress because stress activates this cortisol. Cortisol is a hormone that will release sugar. So what happens when someone has too much cortisol, especially even when they take cortisol as a medication, prednisone, you can really jack up the blood sugar to the point where the person can even become a diabetic because you're just releasing so much sugar. Now, one little piece of this puzzle is that if you wake up in the morning and test your blood sugar and it's high, yet you didn't eat sugar the day before, that is something called the dawn phenomenon. And that really is a problem with this right here. In the morning, right around 8 o'clock, you have the biggest spike of cortisol. So cortisol is contributing to it. In reality, to have this dawn phenomenon, chances are you've had insulin resistance for a long time. Probably didn't know it because you never checked your fasting insulin. But if your blood sugar is high in the morning and you're not eating sugar, it's the liver. You have too much insulin resistance in your liver and there's just no off switch. So the body's just making more and more and more, even though you're not eating sugar. But don't worry, I'm going to show you exactly how to correct this because it's actually not hard, but you really need to understand this mechanism right through here. Now, if you had a test called an A1C, okay, an A1C is an average of 3 months of your blood sugar. You know, you can check your blood sugar periodically and it can be normal, but this looks at the average, so it looks at everything. And it is true, when the liver starts making sugar, it can contribute to the sugar and worsen your A1C a little bit, but usually it's not going to be that big of a deal because for a lot of people, they only have blood sugar issues in the morning. And if they were just to go for a walk and burn that off, they can really get rid of that sugar fast because when they're walking, they're using up that sugar as energy. But a much better test is to check your fasting insulin. You want it between 2 and 6. You don't even want it like 7 or 8. Okay, that's kind of like in the risk area. And if it's like 12 or more, you definitely have some strong insulin resistance. But that's a really good test to see kind of where you're at. Chances are, if you've had insulin resistance for a long period of time, your fasting insulin could be, you know, maybe 8 or 9 or 10 or more. And this is why the liver is still producing sugar because you're not out of the woods yet. So how do we fix this problem? Number one, go on a low-carb diet. That means not just getting rid of sugars, but starches. Start reading labels. The maltodextrin, the modified food starch, those have to go. Number two, snacking must go bye-bye, especially at night. I mean, it's really bizarre to me that someone would need a meal, okay, and then they would need to eat an hour and a half later. They just ate. Why do they need some snack between a meal? It doesn't even make sense to me. Well, they're not really hungry. It's really called a dopamine hunger, where it's not a true hunger. It's more of like these foods are making you addicted. If you were to eat at a Chinese restaurant with a lot of MSG, rice, things like that, and I know for me, an hour and a half later, I'm hungry. Like, am I really hungry? No. It's actually coming from either a blood sugar issue or this dopamine thing. This is why you must not snack between meals. Have 2 to 3 meals. I would recommend just doing 2 meals. Skip the breakfast, okay? And nothing else in between those meals. So you eat at 12 and then at 6. Right after you eat, kitchen is closed. You must bring with you to the grocery store a list of foods that does not have on it any junk foods or snack foods. Most ultra-processed foods fall into this category of snacks. I know this is hard to believe, but when you go into a grocery store, they actually have entire rows of snack foods. I'm not kidding. They'll have an entire row of chips, and then crackers, and then cookies, and then snack bars. and all these different snacks, right? I mean, before the 1970s, we didn't snack because it would ruin your appetite. And then all of a sudden, we got into this 5-6 meals a day thing, and it just got out of control. And number 3, focus on lowering stress, because that definitely contributes. Getting a good night's sleep is going to be essential. Doing regular walking, exercise will help get rid of stress. Getting actually out in the sun dramatically reduces stress versus inside your office where we have fluorescent lights. And then here's the thing, you just have to do that for a longer period of time, because to correct insulin resistance, especially if your fasting insulin is like above 12, could take several months before things reset. How do we heal this resistance? You just have to stop triggering insulin. We just have to lower this insulin for a long enough period of time for these receptors to normalize again. And for some people, it takes weeks, some people it takes months, and some people it could even take over a year, but it will happen. So if you're not eating sugar and your blood sugar is high, you're not crazy, it's a liver problem. And since we're talking about the liver, you have to see my other video that I created on the liver. That's super interesting and very informative. It's right here. Check it out.